This week on Quality Digest Live, we look at the eventful post-war years in the history of quality.
Plus, why is simple nutritional labeling such a complicated issue? We'll find out when we come back.
And welcome back to Quality Digest Live. For March 1st, 2013, QDL is your weekly look at who and what is making the news in the world of quality. I'm Ryan Day, intrepid contributing editor for the Quality Digest, sitting in for the equally intrepid Dirk Ducharme, who is, again, on vacation.
That guy is always on vacation. I tell you, he's got the life.
Yes, must be rough.
It must be rough to be Dirk Ducharme. Well, hi, Dirk. How are you? I'm Mike Richmond, publisher of Quality Digest, and we're going to start off this week with a little bit of the news. A recently released book from Wiley reveals how businesses and individuals can benefit by prioritizing customer needs. Clients First, the two-word miracle written by the husband and wife team of Joseph and Joanne Calloway, details the bad habits that people sometimes fall into when dealing with customers and how those tendencies can be overcome. Now, much of the Calloway's advice is kind of simple and straightforward, stuff that you probably are aware of already. Overcome apathy. Hey, don't be apathetic, right? That's pretty good advice. Always tell the truth. Good advice as well. My dad told me that from way early on.
Saves trouble.
That's right. And make sure you don't have to remember stuff too. And delegate. Make sure you use your team members to help you out in carrying the load. But now, some of the ideas that they raise are a little bit more nuanced, and maybe they're even a little counterintuitive. At least I thought so. One of the things they said is, don't be too professional. Okay, think about that. You're
with the customers.
Yeah, don't be too professional. What they mean by that is be personable. Reach out to them as people and connect with them as human beings, and don't keep that facade of professionalism at all times. It will help you connect better with them. Makes sense. Don't think that you know best. We're all trained to tell people, our customers, that we're experts. We're going to help them. We're going to be good consultative people. But if you don't ask them what they really want and find out what their needs are and kind of let them be the experts, then you're not going to really be able to serve them properly.
The whole interaction.
That's right. Kind of ties in with the first thing about being more personable with them. And this is one that I found pretty interesting because it's one that I think about a lot. Don't fire a customer. Don't ever fire your customer. And we've all had customers that we wanted to fire, and sometimes we do. Sometimes we say, you know what, it's not worth it. Right? This person is difficult to deal with. The account's not generating maybe that much revenue for the organization. Right. More trouble than it's worth, right? Well, what the Callaways say is that those accounts, those clients, those customers are the ones where you can really learn a lot. You can hone your skills. You can find out maybe what you're doing wrong. You can use them to expose maybe some issues in your service that other people who are maybe a little more polite maybe aren't going to be telling you about, which is pretty valuable if you think about it, right?
So you don't run into Donald Trump and just you're fired.
Right, but that's the tendency in many cases is people want to say, write them off. It's not worth it. But the other thing about that they point out, which is interesting, is that if you get a reputation of being the one in your field who can handle those really difficult accounts, that word's going to get out, and you're going to maybe get a lot more difficult accounts, but you're going to get more accounts. You're going to get more people who are going to want to work with you, which is good stuff.
We hear a lot about from customer service experts and people that are really good at it about along those same lines is how much you can learn from how much more you can learn from the difficult customers.
Always, yeah.
Open up to them and have a real dialogue with them.
Yeah.
And some people might call it customer-centric.
Well, but it's okay, and that's the message, and I think that's what they're saying is that great professionals in any field don't just say they put their customer first; they act on it, and they do it in ways that are both big and small. And sales, in particular, tends to be an ego-driven profession. But to do it right, to truly serve your customers right, you need to put your ego in the back seat and embody the highest principles of quality. And again, the way to do that is really to get your ego out of the way. And you got to see things as they really are from the customer's perspective, and only then are you going to achieve what they call breakthrough success. So, Clients First, the two-word miracle is out now. For more information on the story, and in fact, all the stories that Ryan and I are going to be covering on today's show, just click on the story links just below the player page, right down there.
Check them out.
That's right.
Mike, I have a question.
Go ahead.
How green is green?
I don't know. Last week, Dirk and I were both wearing green shirts.
No.
I know that.
Well, if we were talking about an interesting thing came across our news desk this last week, and it was a free brochure from the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, and the brochure was called Environmental Labels and Declarations, How ISO Standards Can Help. And it dealt with ISO 14020, which deals with labeling and declarations of all things green. And in there is for products and services, how you present environmental issues, ethical functioning issues, and how you label them. And in an effort to create a standard, well, they have created a standard for companies and consumers as well to gauge and judge just how green a company's product or service is.
And how do they do that?
With the standards.
Well, good answer.
They came up with this really as we've seen, you know, the continued focus and even a heavier focus on environmental issues and corporate ethics issues and sustainability issues. They thought that in an effort to give benefit to the well, what they're saying is as those issues are continue in the forefront and focus has continued on those, that it's really become an integral part of a company's marketing strategy.
Sure, exactly. Green, yeah.
So
sustainability, sure.
Right, and that's back and forth. As the customer is more interested, we're finding that customers are certainly more interested in the non-tangible aspects of the products and services that they purchase, and so they look more and more towards how a company, what is the life cycle of their products? Right. You know, how do they treat their employees? How.
Well, because this is an international standard as well, a lot of this is about kind of making sure that these processes are done the same way for any company around the world, right? For multinationals or for any individual company.
Exactly so, exactly so. And just like we see, you know, if there are labels on a product that are worldwide, everybody can either, you can choose to create your own game plan as a corporation, you know, and say, you know, if we meet these standards, our consumers can see that,
right,
and vice versa.
Yeah, you're going to prove it, and again, it will be kind of a marketing thing. I mean, because people will understand, you'll communicate to your users, your customers through this labeling, what it is and what you're doing on that front.
There's a caveat to that, and a perfect example was to any of the labels like that, you know, Dolphin Safe or USDA certified organic. Yesterday, my wife baked brownies, and one of the I know, but one of the things she did was purchased butter, and it was based solely on the label. It was labeled organic.
Okay.
And
a lot more money, probably.
It was a lot more money. That's true, but she did so based on the label. Now, the caveat to that is that labels are great, and they give everybody at least some standards to gauge other products by, but you've got to do your homework, because this morning when I asked her about it, and she grabbed the butter, looked at it, and sure, organic, and she read the ingredients real quick, and there was that little, natural flavorings.
Yeah, right. You're like, wait a minute, how is this organic?
What is a natural flavor? It's an organic natural flavor, but we don't know. So that's the caveat emptor.
Was there red number 40 in it?
Organic red number 40.
Yellow number 3.
But you still, you know, any labels like that are fantastic, but you've still got to do your homework as a consumer.
Well, I don't want you to go too much further, because you're going to get into this issue again with your feature article in a little bit, in about 10 minutes. So
don't get me started.
Hold off on that thought. We're going to get you started in about 10 minutes. But before we do that, we're going to turn to the first feature article that we are going to cover this week. Actually, is a story that I'm going to cover, and it's a little bit about the history of quality. and the chronology of quality through the years. And this article was written by Matthew Barcelow. It appeared in Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily. A Chronology of Quality Part 2. Yes, and that was Monday's issue of Quality Digest Daily by Matthew Barcelow. Now, this is actually a 4-part series that Matthew's writing. We ran Part 1 last week. Part 2 ran this week, and we're going to have Parts 3 and 4 coming up later on in March. So what he's doing here is he's talking about, as the topic, as you could get from the title, he's talking about the history of quality and how we came to where we are now. Now, I'm a big fan of quality. I'm a big fan of history and how quality and history and the history of quality.
Peanut butter and chocolate.
Yeah, there you go. So to me, this was a really interesting piece because he really addressed it in an interesting way because he traced, and in Part 2, he's really tracing the post-war years in quality, which is a really fascinating, integral part of where we come from. And he's getting into it with a lot of references. So if you read this article, and again, it's going to be right below the player page, read the article, you're going to see a ton of references and a ton of books and articles that he points out to you that'll show you and kind of supports his argument about where we are and where we came from. So let me kind of run through it quickly and give you an idea of what he's talking about here. So he's talking about the post-war years. And he starts by talking about after World War II, where America was in a really unique position, and almost a position that never been experienced before in the industrial world, where America was pretty much the only seller of industrial products throughout the world who was still standing. I mean, every other major industrialized power had been basically flattened. Their productive power was flattened by that war.
That's right. I was going to say, wait, what about England? Well, what was left of England post-World War?
Pretty much flattened too. You know, there wasn't really a lot of industrial ability. So America was in a position where it was a seller's market, and they could sell pretty much anything. It wasn't about, this is interesting, it wasn't about quality. It was about quantity. For American industry, they had to pump stuff out because they were selling it as fast as they could. And quality wasn't a big deal. As a matter of fact, at that time, quality was considered a cost. It was considered kind of really not something that was necessary. And it was considered a debit for most of these organizations. So you had a situation where America, which really basically with Ford and Western Electric and Bell Labs really began the quality work in the early part of the 20th century, getting away from it by mid-century because of the war and because of the seller's market that Barcelow talks about.
Right. Did not lend itself to lean operations.
No, but we're going to get there. We're going to tell you why lean operations sprung out of that. Because we're going to turn now to Japan. Now Douglas MacArthur, of course, was running Japan essentially after the war, and he wanted to broadcast to the Japanese people. He wanted to bring them up to speed on the reconstruction of their country and what was going on, but there was basically no radio operators. Many of them had died in the war, and there was no industry to create radio. So he turned to a guy by the name of Homer Sarensen, and Homer Sarensen partnered with a guy by the name of Charles Protzman, and they wrote a book called Principles of Industrial Management in 1948, which, again, really kind of began to bring to the attention of these Japanese middle managers who then had to come up through the ranks to fill in the top level, the importance of quality and the importance of quality management. That spurred Deming to come over to Japan in 1950, Duran to follow quickly thereafter, and those guys, Deming in particular, really didn't talk about statistical measures that much. That's really what they sprung out of, and that's, in Deming in particular, came out of the history of SPC, statistical process control. But really what he talked about was PDCA, right? The PDCA cycle.
Act.
Right. And that was something that the Japanese really resonated with, because it really was about not being profligate with your resources. They didn't have any resources. They had very little natural resources. They had no industrial base anymore at that point.
Which was a very interesting place for them to come from, from
right.
really not having industry to speak of.
Right.
But my goodness, talk about like I said, somebody that's been running lean for generations. Mm-hmm. They're on an island, so they have to. You got to bring it in and pack it out.
Yep.
So something like that, I'm sure, did resonate, like you said.
We actually read an article not long ago where we talked about this idea, because the Japanese realized that if you don't have a lot of resources, you've got to manage your resources better, because if you manage your resources properly, it's kind of like you do have resources. And where Americans at that point were getting away from being efficient and lean, the Japanese were really beginning to seize that idea. And that would very quickly come back to make them have a great benefit and to kind of hurt us. What happened was that the lessons that they learned, they then, of course, brought back to America a couple of decades later. But there was one key thing that they did, which they didn't bring back to America, and that was the idea of scientific management. The Japanese were not fans of Frederick Winslow Taylor. And Frederick Winslow Taylor was one of the initial people that really did, time studies, scientific management, trying to analyze how quickly it took people to do work and then make sure that they could do it at that rate. To the Japanese, that dehumanized the worker. And it took away creativity, it took away the ability to really be lean. It's counterintuitive, but it took away the ability from the Japanese mindset to really make the organization, the entire organization, not just management, really run lean and really make the organizations better. So they brought it back to America with this idea that there had to be participation. And what did that do? Of course, that then, of course, launched the idea of quality circles. Now, quality circles, and Kaoru Ishikawa was one of the primary movers of this in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, was something that we, as Quality Digest, know really well. We came out of that world. Donald Dewar,
the quality circles,
our founder, was one of the primary people to bring quality circles over here in the 60s and 70s. So we came out of that, and that idea of participation really led to where we are now, which is a lean environment where it's everybody's responsibility, management and workers, to make sure that the plant, the operation is running lean.
How fascinating is that, though? I mean, that from the United States at a time when we were running just as fat as as far from lean as possible. We export the ideas of quality and lean to a country that's never heard them.
That's right.
Right, coming from the U.S. that didn't.
That's right.
Export it to Japan. Who then brings it back
to us, and we don't recognize it in the 60s and 70s. And
apparently we didn't recognize it in the U.S. at the time it was exported.
No, we really didn't. And it's kind of laughable, really, in a sense that, you had this NBC white paper, if Japan can, why can't we? Well, we were doing it 50, 60 years before that.
Well, there were some people talking about it and thinking about it.
Right, but
industry at large.
Well, because America could. I mean, it's always about what you can bear. And industry after the war in America could bear a lot of waste, a ton of waste, because seller's market. Barcelona talks about it.
And we have the resources to waste.
We did.
And still produce enough.
Right, not for domestic as well as export.
Right.
So, of course, there's a different world. We're talking about 1948 versus now. So you see where all this is headed, as Barcelona continues, as he wraps up his article and ends with quality circles and these ideas coming back to America. You see where he's going. You see that he's going to start bringing in the Toyota production system, which now has become synonymous with lean, and these principles that we need to embrace now because we don't have a choice. We can't run as fat as we did 60, 70 years ago. So again, this is a really good piece, The Chronology of Quality, Matthew Barcelow. It's the second of 4 parts. Parts 3 and 4 you're going to see in the coming weeks.
Worth following.
You're going to learn a lot. And again, I think one of the great things about that is you're going to see a lot of good references in that you can investigate for yourself. And it's the old saying, if you don't know where you've come from, you don't know where you're going. So if you're not aware of some of this history, start by reading the series of articles and then check out the references from there.
Very good stuff.
Yeah,
Very
good stuff. Good stuff from Matthew Barcelow.
Right. Well, our next feature is an article written by Kimberly Egan, titled Simple Nutrition Facts, or Simple Nutrition Facts for Complicated People.
That's right. Kimberly Egan with the Shurex, I believe.
With the Shurex, she is. Yep. And apparently the impetus for writing the article was twofold. One, it was a report, the findings of a report by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD.
OECD, that's right.
At any rate, the 2012 report, one of the findings was the winner of the fattest nation in the world.
Let me guess.
The envelope, please.
Cambodia. And the winner is?
You guessed it. The USA.
The USA.
Winner
again. All right.
That's my best David Letterman.
I'm doing my part to embody that. But
fattest nation in the world.
But why? I mean, we know why.
We have grabbed that big fat brass ring yet again.
How many years in a row is that? I mean, it's
I don't know.
yeah, but you know why? I mean, there's reasons for that, right? I mean,
Well, not surprisingly, the FDA has a lot to say about. Notice I roll my eyes when I say FDA.
Yeah.
Has a lot to say about that. Apparently, they did some extensive testing, some expensive testing, and out of that, they determined that one of the biggest reasons why we're the fattest nation in the world is that given the opportunity to read nutrition labels and compare one product with another, Americans just can't figure out which one is healthier.
butter. You just talked about it 10 minutes ago with your organic butter, right?
I have to preface this because we're talking about FDA and nutrition and labels. That my views may not reflect that of the show,
of me, or Quality Digest,
show, or the sponsors.
Anybody else? That's right.
My comments are my own.
But they're good comments because you're raising issues that, and Kimberly raised the issues as well. That obesity is a big issue. I mean, let's not gloss
trivialize that. No.
Yeah, it's a big issue. It's a big issue with kids. It's a big issue with adults. I mean, diabetes is exploding, and it's exploding not only in this country, it's exploding in countries that are now adapting American dietary habits. You can find a McDonald's on pretty much every corner across the world now.
The SAD.
Yeah,
the standard American diet.
Yep.
The SAD. In the article, Kimberly points out she points out a couple of things that maybe would help that us to not win that award next year. And
or the year after, or the year after.
In labeling, on labels, she brought up the fact that the manufacturers actually decide what a portion size is. So she's saying, there's a few things with labels. One, why did they, they get to decide? She's speaking a box of macaroni and cheese, there's 4 servings there. And therefore, if there's 2,000 calories in a box of mac and cheese, one serving is 500 calories.
Yeah, and it might be like a cup. And you're like, that's not enough.
That's
right.
what's for dinner, though.
Yeah, right.
Right. So, she points out that maybe if the FDA is going to regulate labels and what is going to be on them, what's not, there could be some more useful stuff.
Right.
She points out sugar. There's a sugar count. And she says, well, how about what kind of sugar?
Yeah.
Glucose or sucrose?
Right.
They're hugely different.
Yes. Yes.
One the body already makes, doesn't need, one's going to be harmful.
Right. Well, pure cane sugar and corn syrup are both considered sugars on labels, right? And
well, they do. At least they're required to say what is high fructose corn syrup. They're required to label it as high fructose corn syrup. But I got to tell you, my first reaction on reading this article when she's talking about put useful stuff on the labels. You know what my real reaction was?
What was that?
Who freaking cares? What does it?
I knew you were going to say that.
I wrote it right on the teleprompter. Who freaking cares?
You did.
Seriously, I'll tell you why. When they say salt, and if I'm not mistaken, it is the FDA whose bailiwick, the labeling is in their bailiwick. So when a manufacturer is required to say salt, okay?
Sodium, right? Sodium.
That's the key, and that's why I say, oh my God, you know what? That is not salt. So you're looking at a label that says there's this amount of salt on it. And I walked by a couple ladies the other day who were looking at cans of soup and comparing, well, this has 610 milligrams of sodium. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but that's sodium. That is sodium phosphate. And that's not salt. So they're trying to determine how much salt they want in their diet, but that's not salt.
Right.
That's sodium chloride. I'm sorry, sodium chloride.
Okay.
And sodium chloride is just a little piece of salt, sea salt, or mined salt that you would find in a vein in the ground. And sodium chloride, without the presence of these other trace minerals that are in salt, yes, that does cause problems. Add in MSG, which is known to have vasorestrictive properties and is a known allergen for a lot of people. Is that on there?
Right.
No, instead, the FDA fights tooth and nail to keep that information hidden, and actually works with food producers to keep that kind of information off a label.
So bring it home for us. So this is a quality issue because it affects food manufacturers, but it also affects, of course,
health,
consumers, and the health of consumers. So what do we do? How do we make it better? What do we need to do in terms of, as advocates for quality and as consumers, what do we say to the FDA, to the USDA to make this process better?
Actually, this again goes back to the caveat emptor. It's not so much a labeling issue, because trusting a label is, as far as I'm concerned, my comments are my own, is abdicating your personal responsibility to find out what's in your food. Become educated. It doesn't take all that much time to dig just a little bit and find out. I mean, there's a lot of information right now. We are so lucky to live at the times that we do. There's an awful lot of information on salt and its benefits, sodium, a necessary nutrient. Saturated fats. There's so much new information. Well, there's so much ancient information that has been ignored by modern science concerning saturated fats, whereas the Eskimos, who don't pay any attention, do just fine on a diet of 90% saturated fat. Many American eat. I digress.
But what you're saying, if I can bottom line it, you're saying that we need to be smart consumers. We need to advocate for ourselves. Similar to how you would if you're dealing with your doctor. I mean, your doctor provides the service, but you need to be the advocate for yourself to make sure that you're getting the service that you need for your own body. It's your body. You're responsible for it.
You are responsible. And just like the earlier article on the ISO 14020 certification, it gives the consumer an awful lot of power to sway producers of either products, services, etc. And if we become educated on the issues concerning those products and services, we really can sway producers in the direction that we want. We're the consumer.
Yeah, we have a lot of power. Good stuff. Well, on that note, thank you, Ryan, for that. Thank you, Kimberly Egan, for that good piece. And again, you can check that out. That's right below the player page right there, Kimberly Egan's article on the FDA and labeling.
It's a good short read, good read. Quick, entertaining read,
as
always from Kimberly Egan.
And the AssureX blog, so check that out right below the player page right there. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, well, that's our show for the week. But before we go, we want to remind you about another special live video event coming up next week. Live, we love live. On March 7th, Dirk, who actually will be here.
He's not going to be on vacation.
He's not going to be on vacation. Dirk's actually going to be here on March 7th and on March 8th, hopefully, to do QDL with me. Dirk will be presenting our second episode of Gauging Quality with calibration and gauging expert Craig Howell of CPM Labs. Now, we all know that keeping up, that's right, Craig Howell, you know him. Now, we all know that keeping up with your gauge calibration is important, but did you know that there's a lot to be learned from looking at a gauge's calibration history? In this episode of Gauging Quality, Craig and Dirk will show how examining your gauge's historical calibration records can help you spot potential problems with these gauges. The show will look at gauge plugs, torque wrenches, and micrometers, and demonstrate how software, in this case GaugePack from PQ Systems, can help you easily examine calibration history. So be sure to join us then, Thursday, March 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. It's going to be a great show. So,
if nothing else, that stuff is a lot of fun to play with.
It is. It's going to be. We had our first show about a month ago, and very well received. Craig and Dirk did a great job looking at the characterization of surface plates. But this is going to get into gauges and get gauge history, gauge software with GaugePack from PQ Systems. So tune in for that next week, 6 days from now.
All right.
Great. Well, that's our show.
It. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for being had. It was a pleasure for us, and we'll hopefully have Dirk back at some point. And you all have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday for another week of QDD, and we'll see you back here next week for Gauging Quality and for Quality Digest Live.
See you next week.
Thanks. Bye.